take your seats for this discussion of AI, divine machines, animal machines, and evil machines. And the structure is going to be David Dusenbury, whose idea of this event will talk for 25 minutes or so on divine machines, and then I'll say 25 minutes worth of my take on AI as a bullshit machine. So over to you, David. Please.
Well, thanks so much for the introduction. So we have slides here. And I just want to begin by saying what a pleasure it is not only to be talking about AI here at the Danube Institute in Budapest, but also to be talking about it with David Martin Jones, because the first time we met was here at the Danube Institute about half a decade ago, a bit more than half a decade ago, talking about AI. So this is a kind of a redux, but I think both of our ideas have evolved. Mine certainly have. And as often happens, my remarks are not exactly going to follow the title. So you are definitely going to hear about AI in the light of history. And I would like to begin by simply saying that whatever we might say about the state of the art of AI is almost sure to be refuted or rendered obsolete more or less by next week. And I think this shows, I mean, I read an article this week about the CEO of a leading AI concern saying that basically we were decades away from having convincing text prompt to video AI application. And literally within a matter of hours, a state-of-the-art app called Sora, which renders text prompt into absolutely ravishing video, was released. And so even those who are very much in the industry don't necessarily know the state of the art. And what one cannot see very well here, this is a digital crystal ball in the graffito I just showed you, the Budapest graffito. It says no signal, which is kind of lost on the larger image. And this is the message here. There is no clear signal, it seems to me, in the digital crystal ball. I think this lack of clarity about the state of AI and the future of AI shows significantly, shows us something significant, not just about technology or the state of machines, but rather, I think, about intelligence itself. We're talking about artificial intelligence, and this lack of clarity about AI might tell us something about intelligence. Intelligence is a power, not just a function, but a power that we are seeking to instill in non-natural systems or forms. And I would argue it is a power we are trying to instill in non-natural systems which we do not fully understand in ourselves. And this is, I think, part of the reason why in the debates over artificial intelligence, we not only have very extended and complex debates over what the machines are capable of, but what it means that the machines are capable of X or Y or Z. Does this represent intelligence? And the answer is often unclear because we, in fact, do not know exactly what intelligence is. All technology expresses, materializes an idea about being, about what is, and thus all technology reflects, however, obliquely on what we are. But new wave intelligent technologies, inasmuch as they seek to express, to materialize, to render real in space, our essential trait, our specific power, the differentia specifica, the thing, according to classical philosophy, that makes humans different from all other living species, intelligence, nous. I think our desire to embody in non-human and non-natural systems this specific power of humankind puts our being in question in a way that previous technologies have not done. What is more, as I've written about elsewhere in a short piece which is forthcoming in the excellent Budapest magazine Országot in Hungarian translation, humans actually have some experience of this power, intelligence. We might not entirely know what it is, but we have some experience of it in history. This uniquely human power seems to have a propensity to evil. It seems to be connected in some way to a lust for domination. Both of these things are seen not only in philosophy, but in myth and theology. And if the first appearance of intelligence on earth has not only led to beauty and harmony, namely the appearance of human intelligence on earth, we might well be justified in thinking that a second appearance of intelligence on earth might also not simply bring positivity. It might bring its own sort of fall, its own hitherto unimaginable forms of rebellion, subjection, and ruin. But these are not our questions tonight. Rather, in the coming minutes, we'll be looking at two cases of what humans have imagined. I've just said that we might be entering unimagined territory, but humans have imagined some quite interesting things about artificial intelligence, broadly construed. And we're going to ask what these imaginings might have to tell us, these imaginings in the past, because I've already said the present is very obscure. Anything I talk about the state of the art is going to be rendered obsolete in 5 days or 5 years. So let's look at the past and see whether it has anything to tell us about our collective future. Surprisingly, both of the case studies we're going to have tonight actually come from Homer, of all people and of all things. Is it possible that the blind, archaic Greek singer of war and wandering could actually tell us something about 21st century technology? So the first case study has to do with a fellow named Faust. Not many of us know that there is, in fact, a historical Faust. Many questions surround his origins and life, but it seems likely that the man we now call Dr. Faustus was born in the Black Forest area of Germany, known as Georg of Helmstadt, and he matriculated in the University of Heidelberg in 1483. Interestingly, it seems that he met Martin Luther's right-hand man, Philip Melanchthon, in the 1520s. There are a lot of very colorful stories. Professor Jones has already introduced the word bullshit into this evening's conversation. So I suppose I'm justified in saying that at the end of one of Philip Melanchthon's conversations with the historical Dr. Faustus, he is said to have said, "I shit on your art." This is a direct quote of the rather earthy Philip Melanchthon. Anyway, Dr. Faustus met Philip Melanchthon, and Melanchthon said on a bit higher register, he said this, I'm quoting Melanchthon now, "The devil is a marvelous artisan. By a certain art, he can achieve things which are natural." This is an important point. The devil, by art, can achieve things which are natural, but which humans do not know. And the reason I stress that this art results in mystifying and extraordinary phenomena which are natural, why is this interesting? Because one of the terms for what we now call technology in the period we're now discussing was natural magic. Natural magic. And Faustus was, among other things, a natural magician. We see these terms as very unrelated, but in the world we're now looking at, they were not so far apart. Faustus's legend, on which more in a moment, begins in what is called the Book of Faust, Faust Book, which is printed in 1587. Both Christopher Marlowe, whom we're going to be looking at in a few minutes, and the great Goethe read the Faust Book. So one of the university towns on Faust's itinerary was Erfurt, where, to my astonishment, he held a number of lectures on the topic of Homer. What, we might ask, is Dr. Faustus doing giving lectures on Homer? Well, as one might expect, he was not just lecturing. Rather, what Faust did, and I'm trying to do in a very impoverished form with my slides tonight, what Faust did is not just talk about Homer. Rather, he conjured up what were perceived to be, this is my term, Homeric avatars. He actually summoned up the characters of Homeric epic in visible form in the university lecture hall in Erfurt. And he showed to his audience the dramatis personae of the founding Greek epics. We'll be hearing more about Homeric avatars in my conclusion, but here we can just note, Faust himself, the historical Faust, used light projections to kind of convey the effect to his audience that these characters were real and present. But in addition to that, we could note that the manufacture of humanoid machines was by no means unknown in the 15th century. And it's therefore unsurprising that our word, I'm going to be talking a bit more about where certain important words originate in just a moment. And I can begin by saying that our word android is first attested in Europe in this period. The word is coined in roughly 1625. It seems to appear in French as androide, and but the early moderns used the word android to talk about what the medievals were doing. So there are, in fact, medieval androids. One of whom is attributed to the great Albert the Great, who was the teacher of St. Thomas Aquinas. And there's a lovely legend that St. Thomas Aquinas actually smashed Albert's android because he talked too much and was quite annoying. Okay, a bit of a side note for those who really want to know kind of where things are now. The context for the remarks I'm making this evening all hinge on this claim that the religious, occult, and legendary prehistories of AI belong to the real history of AI. So I'm talking about sort of early modern androids. In a moment, we're going to be talking about Homer. And it might seem that all of this could bear no possible material relevance to the technological culture which we inhabit and which is changing so rapidly. But the writings of really the inaugurator, Norbert Wiener, the inaugurator of cybernetics and thus AI, indicate that he was perfectly well aware that medieval creatures such as the golem or Albert the Great's android, which I've just been talking about, are relevant to the project of creating artificial intelligences. All right, so back to Homer. We've already heard that, weirdly enough, Dr. Faust is very interested in Homer, and he made his way through parts of Germany by lecturing on Homer. And I want to just offer a few remarks on where our words, which we use very unreflectively, three words, where they originate. The first is automatic, which is where we get the term automaton. An automaton is a robot. Where does this word come from? Automatic. And another, actually two words with one scene in between them. So the two words are automatic and machine. Where does the machine first enter European consciousness from what we can tell? So the word automaton, thus automatic, is first found in the writings of Homer. So it enters both Latin and then Greek, or rather Latin and then English and all the other Romance languages and Germanic languages from the Greek. And where we first encounter it is in the courts of heaven in Iliad Book 5. Here we have a nice image of the great god Zeus looking rather relaxed. And as the goddess Hera approaches the kind of fortress of heaven, the gates of heaven open all on their own. And we see the Greek here, automatai. They open as if they are alive. They open on their own initiative, as if they bear within themselves the reason and the capability to work in the way they do. There's another interesting passage we're not going to look at in the Odyssey, where certain scholars see, we now talk about, autonomous vehicles and so on and so forth. There's a bizarre passage in the Odyssey where it seems that some of the ships are self-steering, in fact, and they are in a certain sense automatic. So this is the first appearance in the entire kind of European archive of the concept which we now come to describe as things which are automatic. The second is also in the Iliad. Here we're still in heaven. This is book 18. We're still in heaven, and Hephaestus, who is the god of kind of the forge and of metalwork, he's the only god who works at all, because in Greek culture, to work is not a thing of honor, but really a thing of shame. And so Hephaestus is a very ambiguous character, fascinating for precisely this reason. But we read in Iliad 18 that he had made a number of devices which kind of steered themselves through the palace of the gods, and these two are called automatic. And the term automata, which is kind of the root concept for our robot, is actually used by Aristotle in an extraordinary passage at the very beginning of the Politics. Aristotle is talking about tools, and he says it's not a very nice passage, but it's an important passage, because he says there are two kinds of tools. There are non-living tools and there are living tools. Well, what are living tools? Living tools, according to Aristotle, are slaves. And this is the very lamentable passage in which Aristotle justifies human slavery on the basis of natural differences which occur within human societies. And there's a very long and interesting story to be told about how this concept was first rejected and then later accepted by Europe in the Middle Ages. We need not get into that. The point here is that in this passage, at the very beginning of his political theory, Aristotle says, look, we not only have non-living tools and living tools, we have these automata, we have these robots in Homer's heaven. And Aristotle says, what would it be like if we could replace all free and slave labor in our societies with automata? What if we could order our societies the way the gods order theirs and no one works? Well, basically, fully automated luxury communism is born in this sort of momentary dream at the beginning of Aristotle's Politics. The absolutely most uncanny text in the whole Homeric canon, if you ask me, is in Iliad 18. So the tripods we were just looking at are in Iliad book 18. And here Hephaestus is still in his forge, and he is surrounded by a number of gleaming girls. They're androids. They are built beings. They are not natural beings. They are neither human nor divine. They are beings which Hephaestus has built for himself out of the rare metal of gold, but Homer tells us that they are a match for living, breathing girls. Now, what is most interesting, we've already seen gates that open automatically. We've seen tripods that roam around automatically. We've seen self-steering ships in the Odyssey. But here he says they have intelligence. These golden girls, literally golden girls. The Greek word is nous. They have nous. They have what humans have, which makes us different from every other being on Earth. And Hephaestus' attendants, as I've already said, they're not human beings, they're not natural beings, and yet they have what we have. So we could perhaps say, there's some debate about this, but we could perhaps say that we have something here like Homeric androids. And we are going to come back to the fact in my conclusion that they are very well behaved. They're very agreeable and harmonious and subservient androids. They are the sort of automatic tools that Aristotle is dreaming about at the start of the Politics. Okay, where does machine come from? Well, I haven't actually found the first occurrence of the form itself of machine, but the very first appearance of the root word from which machine enters Latin also appears in one of the founding poems of the entire Greek archive, namely that of Hesiod. And where do we first encounter this rude word of machines? In a text devoted to the origins of the gods, the birth of the gods, the Theogony. And here we read that it is the Cyclops, godlike beings who had all sorts of kind of behavioral and spiritual problems. That's going to be important for us. They had inventive skill, mechani, and strength and power. So I find it two things interesting here. The very first time we find the word from which machine comes, it is linked both to intelligence. We tend to think of, machines and intelligence as kind of contrary domains or contrary realities which we are trying to bring back together in artificial intelligence. But the first time we encounter the root word for machine, it's closely linked to intelligence, and it is also intriguingly closely linked to violence and power. So non-human intelligence is first glimpsed here on Earth because the Cyclops are terrestrial beings in embodied and immensely powerful yet lawless and dangerous form. The first kind of appearance of mechane, which we see, is one-eyed and monstrous. It is not conducive to human life or city life. It is hostile to it. So we're told in the early reports on the historical Faust that during his lectures on Homer is the common thread here. We started with Faust, we're coming back to Faust. I know this is a very episodic lecture, but hopefully you'll leave here with a couple of really clear and I hope interesting ideas that you can mull over. So we're told that the historical Faust, when he was projecting these images in his lectures on Homer, what did he end with? What was the last image that the historical Faust used? He conjured up the Cyclops. We've just been hearing about the Cyclops and Hesiod, and this is what Faust ended his marvelous, absolutely compelling, almost as compelling as this lecture presentation at the University of Erfurt back in the day. Okay, so this connection from the Cyclops to Faust brings us back to Faust, but not to the historical Faust. Rather, I want us to glance at the tragical Faust, who is first portrayed by Christopher Marlowe, later, of course, by Goethe, in the fabulous 20th century novel by Thomas Mann, written in California, but one of the greatest works of European literature, modern European literature. Okay, so Christopher Marlowe, he knew the Faust book, as I've already mentioned. He knew of the curious significance that Homer seems to have had for Faustus, the archetypal natural magician of European myth and history. Thus, in Marlowe's great 1604 play, The Tragical History of Dr. Faustus, it should perhaps not surprise us that there are, not only in the historical Faust's life, but in Marlowe's play, there are Homeric avatars. Now, what is the most compelling character in all of Homer? Well, at least according to Marlowe's Faust, it is also the most beautiful character in all of Homer, and that is Helen. Helen makes an appearance. She is the most compelling Homeric avatar in Marlowe's play, and Faust becomes obsessed with Helen. She appears in a number of different scenes. Here, we see that he begins to pray to her. I mean, this is one of the most powerful lines. This is the only reason why I remembered this text in preparing this lecture. Her lips suck forth my soul. I read that line 25 years ago, and it is one of the most extraordinary lines, I believe, in the whole of Elizabethan literature. Totally unforgettable. And so what we have here is a drama in which Faust conjures the Homeric avatar of Helen. She ravishes him, and then because she possesses his soul, which she has kind of sold, Faust sells his soul to the devil, so on and so forth. She, Helen, possesses his soul, and so he begins to pray to her to, in a sense, have his soul back. What we see here is, among many, many other things, Helen in this scene is a kind of perverse image of Beatrice in the Divine Comedy. Beatrice in the Divine Comedy is, in fact, the woman who redeems. And here we have Faust, who's a kind of perverse seeker, a perverse pilgrim of the underworld and the overworld. And Helen is the apparition rather than the real angel or redeemer who does not give him what he wishes. Okay, why is this so interesting? Well, we began just a few minutes ago by remembering that the historical Faust set himself up in one of the great European universities as a manipulator. He was a performer of natural magic who gave lectures on Homer and manipulated his audience, worked them up into a frenzy by seeming to show them images. Getting back to Sora, I mentioned the text-to-video application Sora. This is in a sense what the original Faust did. He turned the text of Homer into something like video and Erfurt in the 1520s. Okay, but the point is this. The historical Faust appeared to us as one who was conjuring up images of Homer as a manipulator of his audience. And what we see at the end of the tragical history of Dr. Faustus is that the tragical Faust is rather one who is himself being manipulated by the images of Homeric beauty, which he has conjured up in complicated ways. Of course, Faust says, I gave them my soul. He's talking about Mephistopheles and Lucifer. I gave them my soul for my cunning. The argument is very clear. Natural magic has come, for him at least, at a terrible price, an unnatural price. This is the drama of Marlowe's Faust. But what I really want to stress before I make my very, very brief concluding remarks is the unbelievable loneliness that surrounds and consumes the figure of Faust at the end of Marlowe's radical play. I've never written about this, but I've always wanted to, the loneliness of Dr. Faustus. The play ends with this lover of Helen and conjurer of Homeric avatars literally locked in his room alone at the end of the play. He has seen great things, but he has not only lost his own soul, as in the great saying of Jesus, he's not only lost his own soul, he has lost the whole world. His cunning has quite literally left him in a locked room alone with his demons. And I think this is one very distinct possibility of applications like Sora, that it might leave us alone beholding great and marvelous things, but actually unbelievably isolated. So it seems to me, and in conclusion, on the basis of looking at these rather arcane and obscure texts from many, many centuries ago, it seems to me realistically that there are three possibilities for the future of AI. We began by saying that no one knows where this is going, but these are three possibilities which we might take from my brief remarks. First, we might end up with serene and subservient intelligences, intelligent systems, as in Homer's Heaven and Aristotle's Tech Utopia, the golden girls of Hephaestus who do exactly and only what he wishes them to do, but on their own sort of initiative automatically. We could end up with darker and human or quasi-human intelligence like the Cyclops, who have a tendency to lawlessness. They're extremely clever, but their inhumanity is a threat to human society. Or we could end up with deceptive and isolating intelligences, appearances, a world of kind of manufactured realities which cut us off from the roots of our own being and from genuine human society, as we see in Marlowe's Faust. I think the one possibility we can rule out is that artificial intelligences will save or redeem us or take us to places higher than we already are. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was excellent. My take on this is slightly different, although I would just say in passing that Marlowe was murdered in a pub in Deptford with a knife through the eye, and was largely suspected of being an Elizabethan spy that worked for the early Secret Service run by the Elizabethan state. My take is slightly more sociological, I think, but it might fit into what you've said earlier, and I'll try and keep my remarks to about 25 minutes as well. So, with reference to Eric, this is quite a sociological, but conservatives with reason have always been suspicious of technology and its transformative consequences. By contrast, liberals, even more than socialists, have celebrated its possibilities. Marshall McLuhan, the godfather of media studies, who has done more than most to clarify the impact of new technologies on social and political order, considered technology neutral. It was the uses we made of innovations that drove social and political change. The invention of the stirrup made feudalism possible. Gutenberg's printing press created the conditions for individualism, freedom of opinion, and the Reformation. The computer, McLuhan argued, in the 1970s, he used to have a telecommunications center located in the Papal Studies Institute at Toronto University, where he, did his talks when I was there in the 1970s. The global village that McLuhan foresaw would be a Babel of information, but it intimated what his favorite theologian, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, termed the possibility of a world soul or an electronic noosphere. And in that context, the liberal progressive vision that emerged in the late 20th century bought into the notion of technological neutrality. In this context, it served a broader liberal purpose to neutralize politics as well, which has been the progressive liberal dream since the end of the Cold War. It achieved its apogee in the EU and a preference for a law-governed, depoliticized, technocratic mode of governance. Political thinkers, legal scholars, and the mainstream media consistently deployed a teleological reading of European integration to reinforce the pragmatic credentials of this rationalist scheme. Secular neutralism went along with a quasi-religious belief in technology. The liberal attempt to neutralize politics, of course, raised a question which we face at the moment: who decides the exception, as Carl Schmitt wrote. Europe's ad hoc responses to crisis raised in an acute form what Thomas Hobbes had recognized as the enduring political problem, namely that of sovereignty. Whilst the post-war European political class and its scholar bureaucrats, particularly from the 90s, dismissed sovereignty as obsolete. Contra McLuhan and liberal neutralism, conservative thinkers considered technological innovation far from neutral. It required safeguards rather than enthusiastic adoption, as the unforeseen consequences could unravel traditional understandings of order. European boundarylessness offers not progress but anarchy. Under technocratic guidance, a protoplasmic blob rather than a body politic. A credible political state must establish itself, as Hobbes said, as a leviathan, which is itself a machine. It's almost a robotic idea of a leviathan figure who overawes the proud. This fear-driven desiring machine, uniting its members over time into an organized or coherent body politic, not an incoherent blob. this persona ficta constitutes the artificial person of the state. Hobbes, in fact, went into considerable detail throughout the first part of the Leviathan, the second part of the Leviathan, outlining the details of this body politic and how it could suffer from constitutional distempers, from diseases that undermined it. In Hobbes's darkly skeptic vision, there can be freedom of speech and opinion, but is the sovereign who decides the rules of debate. Absent sovereign authority, the state dissolves. Much contemporary angst about freedom of speech, the rule of law, the political distinction between the public and the private reflects, in fact, a technology and a media of this earlier bounded political machinery. So, in fact, the political machine of the 17th and 18th century, the body politic, organized in a coherent manner, allowing for freedom of speech but regulated, is undermined by the AI world. The AI world has replaced the political body that regulated speech but enabled individual flourishing, not with a new machine, but with a net in which we're trapped. Its deregulation and its ubiquity undermines the self, conscience, and any notion of truth central to the political condition. We have entered instead, as David was sort of intimating, a realm that relativizes truth, questions reality, and replaces it with fake sincerity. A quasi-religious technicity aligned with the post-political condition leaves us in a no place, where misinformation and disinformation replace the disinterested pursuit of truth. The Cambridge Dictionary, and we're living in an age of misinformation and disinformation, as we know, the Cambridge Dictionary defines misinformation as false information that is spread regardless of whether there is intent to mislead, and disinformation as deliberately misleading or biased information and a manipulated narrative or manipulated facts. Both misinformation and disinformation are types of false information, though only disinformation is wrong on purpose. That's the dictionary definition. Interestingly, the world before AI would evaluate these practices not as misinformation or disinformation, but as forms of lying. While the Gutenberg world sought truth through regulated but open debate, the internet then is a lying machine. Augustine, whose De Mendatio and Contra Mendatium remain the locus classicus for the lie, would define misinformation as not a lie. It's just some false thing, not a lie. For whoever utters that which he holds in his mind, either as a belief or as an opinion, even though it be false, he lies not. By contrast, the disinformer is one who has one thing in his mind and utters another in words, or by signs of whatever kind, whence also the heart of him who lies is said to be double. That is, there is a double thought, the one of that thing which he either knows or thinks to be true and does not produce, the other of that thing which he produces instead, thereof knowing or thinking it to be false. Augustine went on to identify 8 types of lie, which would in fact add much greater clarity to our thinking about disinformation. The most pernicious lie is the 4th lie, the lie which is told solely for the pleasure of lying and deceiving. That, he said, is the real lie, and there's a lot of that about on the internet. But our condition, trapped in the net of lies, is perhaps even worse than Augustine could have imagined, because at least the liar knows he preaches not what he practices. But in the condition of post-truth, we are living with a lying machine permeated by bullshit. Now, I'm not using that as a sort of a vulgar expression. I'm taking it from the the great short book by the Princeton philosopher Harry G. Frankfurt, who in 2005 wrote a brilliant assessment of on bullshit and why it's so prevalent. Bullshit does not reject the authority of truth, Frankfurt argues, as the liar does. He pays no attention to it at all. By virtue of this, bullshit is a greater enemy of truth than lying. Frankfurt asked in 2005, why is there so much bullshit? He answered, the greater the communication, the greater the net, the greater the potential for permanent communication, the greater the potential. AI has actually weaponized bullshit. Bullshit is inevitable whenever circumstances require someone to talk without knowing what he or she is talking about. Democracy, the absence of authority, and everyone's right to their truth in the AI world evinces this lack of connection between a person's opinion and his apprehension of reality. This will be even more the case for someone who believes they have a responsibility or are empowered by their lack of gender or their hideous oppression to evaluate events. Its deeper source reflects radical forms of skepticism that assume we have no reliable information of the world or access to objective reality, and hence knowing how things truly are. Woke anti-realism undermines disinterested efforts to discern what is true from what is false, and even the intelligibility of objective inquiry. One response to this loss of confidence is a retreat from any disinterested pursuit of truth to a quite different pursuit of my truth, through a faux assertion of my sincerity and my pain. Rather than arrive at an accurate representation of a common world, the woke instead turn to what they conceive to be accurate portraits of themselves and their truth. Convinced that reality has no inherent nature, they devote themselves to their own nature and feelings. Since there is no truth in facts, the woke are true to themselves. This is preposterously narcissistic. As conscious beings, we exist only in relation to other things, and we cannot know ourselves at all without knowing them. There is nothing to support the extraordinary judgment that it is the truth about me that is easiest for a person to know. Facts about ourselves are not solid or resistant to dissolution. Our natures are elusive and insubstantial, notoriously less stable and less inherent than the nature of other things. In other words, the sincerity on steroids that the internet encourages and feeds is bullshit. We are trapped in a net of evil, and unless contained, dooms us at best to a world of lies, at worst to a condition of total bullshit. Here ended the Okay, well, having listened to that, maybe we got a few questions to kick around. Eric first, probably.
No, I was going to run with the question, but first there was microphone, but there isn't like. No, I didn't have any question. Hold on, I'm going to take your job.
Sorry, okay.
Say we got a question. Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. I was interested in the first quotation from the Iliad, that he talks of intelligence in the heart. He talks of the creature having a mind, but intelligence in the heart. So I think that suggests to me that Homer is thinking of intelligence as not separate from, but intrinsic to emotion, which I don't think we could say is anywhere nearly the case with AI. I wonder if you'd comment.
Yeah, so I would need to go back and consult the Greek. I mean, I definitely noted that the word, actually the kind of Attic precursor to what we call nous, noos, is used for mind and translated as intelligence in that passage. But you're right. They seem to be endowed, at least in this translation, which I'm sure is in one way or another rooted in the Greek, with heart. And I mean, that in a sense would invite a very different reading, because I don't even think, even though the Greek gods are very passionate, and Hephaestus has a very passionate sort of, arrangement with Aphrodite. I mean, there's jealousy and betrayal. There's all sorts of stuff going on. But at the same time, I think in a certain sense, the gods, I would have to look at whether the gods have heart. So I guess one could ask whether this formulation connects them more to humans or to the gods. But yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that the sense and significance of them having intelligence is radically altered by that reference to the heart.
Fine. I got nothing to add. Yes.
Just picking up on both of your statements, you recognize the spiritual nature in both presentations of the main topic, the main topic of discussion. I'm teaching global governance, and I just wonder whether the global village has anything with monism, pantheism, beyond just the manipulative effects of it. It is a monistic, pantheistic, vis-a-vis pluralistic structural, historical structures. So what would you say? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's... Yeah, obviously, global village is a McLuhan concept. I mean, he coined it in the 70s as he saw, the change in technology would create this condition of information Babel. So he knew something was going to change from the computer, by the computer age. I mean, AI wasn't around in the 70s, but McLuhan was an interesting figure. He wasn't particularly interested in morality. He wanted to know what is going on, So what is going on is one of his... So he used to give these lectures in the telecommunications department at the University of Toronto, housed in the Eugenio Garan Institute devoted to Catholic thought. And McLuhan himself was a Catholic. So he thought the global village could actually, the telecommunication revolution would actually create a different type of individual, like different from the Gutenberg world. So the Gutenberg self is created through the page, right? So if we look back to the Reformation and the Reformation machine, you could call it, which would be classically located in, say, the great work on Puritanism by Patrick Collinson, the English historian, did a work on the Dedham classes, which were the heart of Puritan Reformation in Essex in England, which is where the major Puritans were based. If you looked at, so the medieval church would be a sensory experience. If you looked at Lincoln Cathedral in the 14th century, it would be in a blank plane, and it would be lit up in day-glow colors. You'd go into it, it would be incense, it would be images, it would be an entirely sensual world. What did the Protestants do with that world? Well, they smashed the images for a start. But most importantly, they painted everything white in the churches. they put the preacher on a stand and he taught the word. And the word was, your relationship to the word, but also the printing press created a vernacular vocabulary. So every individual could have his own relationship to the printed page. This is the birth of individualism, and it's the birth of freedom, and it's the birth of public opinion or opinion being promulgated. And the key figure here would be someone like Milton, a revolutionary in the Areopagitica, which calls for freedom of speech. Now, that world, Hobbes recognized, had to be contained. If you were going to have freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, individualism, you had to have a container, and he called it the body politic or the Leviathan. McLuhan recognized that, but he recognized the computer was redesigning the self in a way that meant the computer became a new skin. In that skin, we were located not to a body politic, but to a kind of an electronic new world. And the evolution of AI, which he thought would create a global village, actually creates only a Babel. And without that container, we are open to all the problems of misinformation, disinformation, and, quite literally bullshit, because there is no longer truth.
David, on.
No, I was just going to say two things. One, I believe Eugenio Garen is the author of a very important book. I was trying to find it, and I couldn't find it because the signal is weak here. But I believe he's the author of a very important work on Renaissance magic.
Yes,
in fact. So that kind of connects McLuhan and the history of AI and technology to some of the weird histories I was talking about. The only thing I would add is I'm also working on two pre-modern, one medieval and one Baroque figures who are intensely religious, and their projects are intensely Christian. One is Ramon Llull, and the other is G.W. Leibniz, who are seen for interesting and important reasons to be precursors of AI, because they both were interested in combinatorial art and universal calculus, which were basically formal systems which would create huge numbers of valid propositions, formally valid propositions, and they both believed, I'm actually getting somewhere which is directly relevant to what you were just saying, but they believed that ultimately the purposes of, for Ramon Llull, of Christian apologetics, and for Leibniz, of the kind of ecumenical peace of the church and the people of God, could be attained by using these combinatorial arts for the universal calculus. Okay, why am I saying this? Because they also both realize that as soon as you create these massively complex mechanistic systems which create and facilitate the creation of propositions, you're going to generate unbelievable amount of false propositions. And so they actually came to different conclusions about the values of their system, but they both realized that in a certain sense that any sort of proposition generating machine was a bullshit machine. So I think that is actually a really profound insight that you're bringing back to the... Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was a little bit shy at first. But so my question to both speakers, and it's been already partly answered by David Martin Jones, is this new reality of AI destroying the world of politics? Is it moving humanity away from politics as such, instead of changing us or being a technological and social and cultural change that may impact politics and may cause us in the future to have a different kind of politics? Doesn't it remove us from politics as such if you interpret politics in the Arendtian sense of coexisting in a plurality and having deliberate reason in the public sphere? So the way Hannah Arendt used the term politics is very close to the classical sense of politics as being deliberation in public life. And so you leave your house and you do politics. and like bad things happen in politics, but there's also a inherent elevation and nobility to politics, because you're out of the house, you're not sitting on the couch, you're deliberating about the future of your community or subsection of your community. So there's something really noble and ethical, for the Greeks, of course, ethical, and also for Arendt, about the political life. And if we live in this, if AI pushes us toward, becomes this enormous bullshit machine, and we're going to live in this demonic realm of quasi-truths, of images, no one knows what the original image is. Is this a real person that I'm seeing on this picture? Has this really been said by anyone? Does it even still? Perhaps at some point it won't even matter anymore whether the movie was made by someone or meant something to someone who made it, or if the person that is seen, that is quoted, is actually a real person, or not even a real person, but it's just some pixels put together. So I would like both speakers to respond. Is AI removing politics as such from human reality?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, I think that's that's the argument, really. I mean, politics is a product of in Europe, it's the product of the Renaissance and the Reformation, that you had these debates about truth. It created the conditions for a scientific revolution through, empirical experiment. The Royal Society being the classic understanding that you could test things, that there was a real, that you interacted with the real, you did empirical observations, and they were testable. The AI world is the antithesis of that. There is no reality for the woke. Reality is whatever you want it to be. A woman can have a penis in AI world. In biology, that's impossible. But there's something coming up on Friday, which we're involved with at the MCC, about a biology instructor who believes in Darwinism, who's been sacked by the University of Paris because he believes that gender is, or sex is, an accurate, observable, real fact. Whereas in the post-truth world, you can be whatever you want to be, and my truth is as good as your truth. So the possibility of politics in this condition, the idea of the distinction between the private and the public, so central, as you said, to the Greek condition and to the early modern condition and to our understanding of the political, whether you look at Arendt or Bernard Crick, who used to be the professor of politics at Sheffield, who's in defense of politics, used to be the primer for every undergraduate from about the 1960s down to the 1990s. No longer taught, of course. All those arguments that people like Oakeshott, Arendt, Eric Voegelin would make is that, the political is a condition that renders freedom possible because it creates a distinction between public and private. It established rule by law, not rule by men. And, the basis of it is something like contract. Now, all that is now obliterated by AI. There is no public and private. My private is as important as the public. So, yeah, I think, so this leads us into the liberal progressive idea that all technology is neutral. Well, no, it's not. But it neutralizes politics as well, which is part of the technical vision that the progressives adopt. They think progress is technology. Well, in the AI case, maybe it's not. Maybe it's leading us into some kind of, matrix world that we're having to grapple with. And there's people that are brought up within this world now that accept it. And people like me, and even you, who's younger, who still see the distinction. But the distinction is going, and we're rapidly entering this, condition, which is evil, really, theme.
No, my main thought has to do with the creation of the science of statistics, which really is an early modern, like 17th, 18th century science. And of course, we tend to forget that the word state is ultimately what informs statistics. So statistics are forms of kind of reckoning, which make kind of technocratic, physiocratic analysis of the body politic possible. And I think, a very long and complicated story could be told about the role of statistics and kind of public knowledge, let's say, public scientific knowledge in liberal democracies over the last couple of, 2-3 centuries. And actually statistics were first sort of refined not by liberal Democrats, but by the kind of absolute monarchist French, as I recall. Okay, but the point I'm making is this, is I think one of the many aspects of the problem is that the AI systems we already have in play, forget the future, the AI systems we already have in play function in ways which make it impossible even for those who devised the systems to reconstruct how the output is related to the input. The analysis takes place on levels and in ways that even those who devise the system cannot reconstruct the analysis. I hope this can be confirmed or disconfirmed by those who know more about AI than I do, but this is my very clear understanding of the case. And it seems to me that when whatever role one assigns to the sort of public numerical knowledge, let's say, of the body politic that we call statistics, it has been absolutely fundamental for anything like public discourse for a very long time, for better or worse. I'm not a huge fan of statistics, but the point is this: we at least had forms of public knowledge, numerical forms of public knowledge, every step of which could, in theory, be reconstructed by anyone and verified or falsified. And we increasingly find ourselves in a situation in which the data which is being used to describe the body politic is a black box, like a complete, formal, absolute technological black box. And I think this makes the kind of possibilities for genuine liberal democratic, contestation or, political analysis much more difficult.
Okay. Yeah. Another question?
Maybe I did ask him. Is there anything we can do about this?
Yes. What do you think? Well, what would be a response would be what you were talking about the other day, China firewall.
China fire.
Well, it contains the spread of social media. It contains the internet. There's a kind of sovereign within that, which is not available in our AI world. It's a complete anarchy of information.
Then our freedom is says you have totalitarian systems, and you.
So then our freedom would the implication would be that our freedom consists in being able to switch between totalitarian systems. So you would have one or you would have now, let's say one. Well, I'm speaking a little bit hyperbolic here, of course, but you would have one realm which would have marked by substantial unfreedom, and you would have another realm marked by substantial unfreedom. But your freedom would consist in being able to get an airplane ticket and enter the other realm, because there the algorithms would be skewed by other data, other sets of data, but the data would be just as much a black boxes on the other side.
Well, I think if I come back to that a bit, I think one of the problems with the way the AI world has developed is that, when this internet technology took off, right? So, Harry G. Frankfurt's writing 2005. The internet hadn't really started then. I think companies like Google, Facebook, the FANGs, Amazon, they all start off between 2002 to 2005, 6, 7. So the AI world has been with us really for less than two decades. Now it's quite interesting that the moment who developed AI, it was the left coast, west coast, libertarians really. They were all anarchists, influenced, and they wanted. They were the smart guys. They were young. They were tech savvy. They created the conditions for the World Wide Net. The idea that the internet should be an anarchy started from the very beginning. And the problem was the generation that was the political class didn't have a clue. Anybody over 40 in 2005-6 was very unsavvy about technology. You had people in major companies used to have to employ someone to answer an email. So the way in which the internet took off was a deregulated anarchy. And anarchies are, despite some libertarian thinkers, always dangerous. You need a political order to contain it. We never achieved that. The great failure was no regulation of the net, and every attempt to regulate it since about 2012 has failed because of the power of the FANGs. So, the failure has been a failure of political will. The failure of political will has allowed this technology of lying to proliferate in a way that now is very difficult to control. I don't know.
No, I one of the greatest sources of hopelessness is not exactly what David just said, but something he kind of pointed to, and that's the character of the drivers of technological innovation in the West. And I'm regularly just astonished at the kind of philistinism of the people who are ultimately at the forefront, with very, very few exceptions, names that would probably be familiar to some of us, but vanishingly few exceptions. And so it's not that we have sort of Leibniz's contriving these systems of massive calculation. We have total Philistines who are driving the development. But the only other thing I would say is, to be fair, philosophy begins, and arguably certain kinds of religion at least begin with the argument that basically we're surrounded by falsehood, and the city is a space of opinion, not truth, and that we have to struggle to find the truth. We have to struggle to be free. These are things that no one gives us, that we have to fight for ourselves. And so I think it's one thing we actually can do, and this is Jan Patočka's argument in the 1970s when he talks about whether technological culture is decadent. What he ultimately says is technological culture has all sorts of problems, but either we are decadent or we are not decadent. This is a decision we make. This is a form of life that we cultivate for ourselves. And I think that one of the things we can do is just insist on that.
Today, of course, would have been Roger Scruton's 78th birthday, I think. 79th, rather. He was fond of a phrase, the rational optimist, which is what he thought the conservative should be, rather than the declining cynic. And you talk of people declining into bullshit, which I think for some people is because they find that the world has not matched up to their ideals, and for other people because the world is so depressing a place that they have to go into the virtual rather, to find a real world. But there is optimism. And to me, the latest form of hope is the reaction to Google Gemini, which when people would ask it, which they were doing all last week, show me four ideas of someone who would have fought in the English Civil War, or 4 ideas of Roman legionaries, or 4 ideas of the Founding Father. Because it had been programmed to including in everything ethnic diversity, everything was bullshit. And this was pointed out ad infinitum. And Google was forced to make an exceptionally embarrassing climb down in public and say that it would go back and rewrite it. Now, does that not suggest that people are aware of the intrinsic bullshit of so much AI and will not allow it, will not stand for it?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think the more it proliferates, the more that we're living in a post-truth world, and the more, as Frankfurt put it, the idea that there's a distinction between a person's opinions and his apprehensions of reality, and that those who are encouraged to speak who know nothing, which has become the distinctive feature of our, kind of post-truth world. That, I don't know whether you ever bother to watch BBC World News these days, but every presenter is either either female, Muslim, or sort of a minority. There's virtually no male commentator, but irrespective of that, the quality of the actual newscasting is atrocious. I was watching it, yesterday. The lead presenter, who's replaced Hugh Edwards, who got into trouble for other reasons on the internet, and Hugh was intelligent. He was a graduate of one of the better universities. He had a degree, a master's in French. He could have been a medieval scholar, actually, Hugh. He's replaced by a woman. I've tried to remember what her name was, but so there was a debate, with an international trade expert on the impact of Gaza on international trade, and this woman, another woman, is of course explaining, there's been sort of real impact on trade because of the costs of going around the Cape of Good Hope, and so the news analysis said, oh yes, they can't get through the Panama Canal. You think, this is at 8 o'clock in the morning, BBC World News, that the lead analyst can't distinguish between the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. And this morning she was on again, and same woman, looking rather haggard, and she says, they're talking about the Polish farmers, and they said, oh, there's a lot of farmers, unrest. It's not just Poland. We've got the problem in France and Italy. Well, I don't think the Italian farmers are doing anything. You could say Dutch farmers, French farmers, German farmers, not Italian. But she says, oh, French and Italian, and the ignorance of the debate, and you can see it all the time over the presentation of Gaza. You used to have intelligent commentators, not Palestinians, but your foreign correspondent. Used to be the great BBC radio show on Sundays for 2 hours. You had really well thought out, they might have been left of centre or right of centre, but their knowledge of the country they were working in, their long-term experience of it, gave them gravitas and authority. Now who's appointed to talk about Palestine or Africa or, the Middle East? You've got to be Middle Eastern. You've got to be Palestinian. You've got to be, Nigerian. You can't actually be some white guy who's done the history, explored the place, and can view it somewhat objectively. You've got to be born in. You've got to be part of it. It's got to be your truth. You can't have disinterested reportage anymore. Once that's gone, we're in a world of bullshit, really.
Yeah, I have no comments on the BBC, but getting back to Gemini, I do think that my understanding of the matter, I could be wrong, but my understanding of the matter is that none of the personnel has changed. And there, it was such an egregious sort of, it was such an insult to kind of public intelligence that I tend to be a bit more skeptical that we'll see positive change unless enough pressure were to be brought to bear. Or getting back to a point David made earlier, if there were genuine regulatory pressure brought to bear by the government, by the state. But unless there were kind of cultural pressure brought to bear to such an extent that the people responsible for this lost their positions, which I don't think they have, or the government stepped in, I tend to think that it's simply kind of going. The outrage will last a couple of news cycles, but the ongoing kind of corrosion of historical, collective memory, cultural memory will continue apace.
Yeah, I think the other point is that, in the political condition, it was about reasoned debate. That there was an understanding that conditioned the political debate. There were gatekeepers, and you would have responsible journalists, both of left and right, and you could debate the condition, really, of the commensurability between liberty and equality, the great two, debates within liberalism from the end of the 19th century onwards. Now, however, it's not reason that is the basis of understanding or debate. It's rage and protest. So the more angry you are, the more enraged you are, the more you're outraged by the racism in Western society, the more you're enabled somehow. So reason is no longer the terms of discourse. It's your outrage and protest, your anger that makes your truth, really. The more you passionately adhere to something, the more, authentic, sincere you are. And anger has always been a tool of revolutionaries, really. Mao, in fact, saw cultural revolution based on destroying everything traditional by enraging people, by making them, tear down the hideous nature of civilization. And our enraged condition on the internet, which is the basis for all these radical movements to proliferate, will undermine our civilizations without doubt, I think.
A condition of self-righteous indignation.
Yes, that's right. Okay, well, Matt, does anybody else stop? Well, yes.
From the title, we have machines and AI. Somehow, in a sense, they are different because intelligence, in a way, we think mostly out of the machines. But in another way, I just thought in another perspective that in the machines we were talking about in history, in the light of history until now, most of the machines, we are doing something or making something to do something for us. Either it's good or bad at the end, even if your intentions are good. This is what we call machines, mostly what we are using. But in my view, AIs, we are making something, which is making something to do something. So it's like the gene out of the bottle. So we don't know what we are doing, what at the end will the result. So what is your thought about this kind of concept? Is it working, or because I led to the same conclusion, I'm skeptic about what will happen with the AI and to society.
So, I mean, in the talk I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks when David and I were here a number of years ago, I drew a distinction which I personally still find, helpful between classical machines and new machine systems. And a classical machine, on my definition, was one whose structure was entirely transparent to the creator, the designer of the machine, and whose outputs under normal functioning conditions could be predicted with absolute regularity by the designer of the machine. So the term I used for classical machines is that they were formally and functionally transparent. And it seems to me that there is something fundamentally different. In a sense, you can bracket the question of true intelligence, general intelligence, whatever you want to call it. It seems empirically to have been established that we now are dealing with machine systems which are neither formally nor functionally transparent to their designers in ways that classical machines were. And so I do think that if nothing else, this marks a threshold, and I think it marks a worrying threshold.
The other point there, is the idea in AI, or the tech, kind of guru, or the progenitors of a new AI being look to achieve what Ray Kurzweil, the chief, kind of project master of Google, who was behind the DeepMind project, was the idea of the singularity. So the singularity is where you become a machine. So there's a book about the dream of, or the vision, which is, of course, immortality. So people like Peter Thiel and I think Zuckerberg invest in the idea of living forever. They want to turn into machines. That's the Kurzweil vision, that you can preserve yourself in some kind of, machine which will continue your consciousness. So it's the dream of immortality, which has always been a dream going back to the 19th century, to, the not so much Faust, but
going back to Gilgamesh, right?
Yeah,
I mean, this is one of the great dreams of humankind.
Yeah.
But I suppose I would just say that when one looks at not to interrupt you, but when one looks at the earliest appearance of this great dream of humankind, the shadows are already apparent at the beginning.
And you end up with, the dream of the machine. Well, to live forever. I mean, Swift in Gulliver's Travels, in the Laputa sequence, talks of the Lugubs, the people who cannot die. It's a curse rather than a blessing. But the dream of the immortality that people like, they have these facilities in Texas to, bury you or cut your head off and preserve it so that it might at some point be reanimated in a machine. So we're living with a machine that wants to, we want to be a machine is one of the AI dreams. Did you? There's a question here.
I only have two small comments from a cultural, historic, and a literary historical sense, but if any other questions, I'll wait my turn. Thank you for the thought-provoking lecture. I just wanted to make one comment on Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus, and I just remembered that his son Klaus Mann also had a very famous book, of course, called Mephisto, which is made into an excellent movie by the Hungarian film director István Szabó, and that story, a scientist, in this case an actor, selling his soul to the devil, to Mephisto, is put into Nazi Germany. And it has a wide-ranging background story. I strongly advise to look at that, because the book was physically banned in Germany by the Constitutional Court. And it was still made into a movie in Hungary with a lot of tricks and nifty solutions to be able to be produced. And the other one is more a colorful, possibly a final note, is that I just learned in the last few weeks that the origin of the Kyklops in the Greek mythology is based on ancient elephant skulls. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. I just found the pictures as well. These were ancient elephants living in the island of Sicily. And they died out because of inbreeding and because of the lack of resources. And the skulls were found by the sailing Greeks in the island of Sicily. And these are skulls with a large hole in the middle, where the trunk of the elephant actually connected to the brain. And the Greeks thought that they were giant monsters because they also had the fangs, what is it called in English?
Tusks.
The tusks of the elephant, thank you. And they just juxtaposed the pictures of the Kyklops statues to the pictures of the skulls of these ancient elephants, and it's fascinating. I can show you after the lecture. So just perhaps something to include visually with some pictures in your lecture for the future. Thank you.
I would only add two things. Thank you so much. One, the Greeks were right about the Cyclops the elephants, that they were intelligent because elephants are so wonderfully intelligent. But they were wrong about their nobility, because the Greeks really valued the morality, the virtue of the elephant, and so in that sense they were clearly mistaken. Thank you. I had no idea.
And thanks for the reference to Szabo's great movie Mephisto, which is a really have you seen it? No, it's but it is exactly in that sort of Magus type vein. And okay, well, on that note, thank you all very much, and good night.